good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully everybody had a good lunch and you can hear me okay at the back. Hopefully you can understand me as well, because as you can hear, I'm not from North America. I'm originally from Ireland. I live in Belfast. Spent most of my time there. This afternoon, what I want to try and do in the next sort of 15 to 20 minutes is give you a sense of this topic and kind of open this topic up a little bit. I'm not going to present too much data, but what I am going to do is sort of talk of some of the challenges that face the industry and some of the opportunities that I think exist around this topic of trying to optimize fibre utilisation. And obviously, on one hand, we've got this huge demand for energy intake, trying to meet very high demands for milk yield. And on the other hand, we're trying to do that with, at the same time, providing enough dietary fibre and in a physical enough form in order to maintain rumen health and make sure that we're not causing problems, other nutritional problems such as Sera or other imbalances in the ration. So it's quite a difficult balance that we have to achieve as nutritionists in terms of trying to meet this very high demand for energy, which seems to be increasing all the time. But yet, on the other hand, trying to balance that off with plus the variability in forage and providing enough forage and enough fibre. I just want to highlight where the industry has come from and where it's going in the last sort of 10 years. We've seen quite a high level of increase in terms of milk yield. I think in North America now the average yield per cow stands at around £23,000 per year. And obviously there's a lot of guys doing a lot more than that. There's been quite an increase over the last 10 years, and I think it roughly translates to about a 12% improvement or increase in milk yield. And that trend line seems to have there's no leveling off of that. Looking at that trend, it seems to be fairly linear, and the indications would suggest that will probably continue to increase over the next number of years. And I guess the challenge therein lies that, can we continue to feed these cows with ever increasing energy demands for high milk yields, but still maintain the requirement for the forage and the base in the ration? And I think I read in a paper quite recently, it was a relatively old paper, but from 2009, and it actually compared the dairy industry in the US today, or at that point, which was 2009, back to 1944. And it was quite interesting, the statistics that they mentioned, because they said that today's industry produces nearly 60% more milk with 64% fewer cows, consuming 77% less feed and 65% less water per litre of milk than we did back in 1944. So obviously the industry has made really significant strides in terms of efficiency, in terms of performance, and looking at that graph over the last 10 years, that seems set to continue in terms of yield. So in terms of forage quality, we know that obviously forage quality is very variable, and that's one of the biggest challenges that we have to deal with in terms of rationing cows. And I think Chris Petrosky is going to give us a bit more of a flavour of the variability that exists on farms, and particularly in forages, even within the clamp and even or across the face of a clamp, that variability can be significant. And Chris is going to give us a bit more of a flavour of how we can actually measure some of that variability and take more account of it in our rations, and the opportunity that exists within that if we can better measure that inherent variability on a more regular and day-to-day basis, and what the value in that might be. We know that certainly if we can feed higher quality forages, that has quite a big impact in terms of animal performance. And I think Mike Allen and his group did some work way back in '99, which suggested that if we can, for every unit increase in NDF digestibility, we could predict that dry matter intake would increase by around about 0.17 kilos per day, and we could see potentially milk yield responses around sort of half a pound of milk by just increasing NDF digestibility. So I think we can also, we're much better at modelling the changes in NDF digestibility. We're much better at modelling the quickly and the slowly degradable fractions, and we've heard a bit about that in the conference over the last couple of days. But I think ultimately the aim still must remain that we must try to feed as high a quality forage and as high a quality fibre as possible, because that has quite a big impact on performance. And certainly I think in Mary Beth's presentation, I think she'll probably touch on the relationship between forage quality and animal performance, and she'll probably go into a little bit more detail on that. Certainly when we're talking about forage quality, I think certainly we've made quite substantial progress in terms of not only the plant varieties that we use and the different types of crops that we use. We're now using a lot of BRM corn silage, better varieties of maize silage, for example. And we're also harvesting at earlier crop maturities, and we've come a long way in our ability to manufacture silage, and our silage techniques have improved over the last sort of 30, 40 years in trying to maintain as much of that value in the crop and keeping it in the silo and until we get to feed out. So I think that obviously the quality of forage is key, but there's one thing that we don't have a lot of control over, and that is particularly the weather. Weather conditions are very variable and can have quite a big impact on forage quality. And also, I guess, the region in which we're trying to grow our forage has quite a big impact on the type of forage and the quality that we have available to feed cows. Whatever quality of forage we have available in the clamp is generally we have to make best use of that. We can't usually change it too much at that point. And I think, we have to balance the rations accordingly depending on what level of forage and what quality of forage we have. And there are other ingredients that we can use to try and balance those rations off in terms of our supplements, in terms of fat inclusions, whether it be protected or non-protected. And obviously we have to be mindful about the levels of that and the impact on fibre digestion. And there's other things that we can use to, I guess, tweak and fine-tune rations around talking about additives and, yeast cultures, rumen buffers, etc. We can use to try and, get that last few percentages in terms of balancing the rations properly. I think Tim McAllister in his presentation is going to talk a little bit more about some of those technologies to try and improve fibre digestibility and improve the performance in using fibre, and also touch a little bit on some of the newer technologies that we might have available to extract a little bit more value from fibre going forward. I think this slide gives us a nice diagram in terms of what actually happens when we move from very much a forage-based ration towards more supplementation with starch and with concentrates. And you can see the impact that has generally in terms of the proportions, relative proportions of VFAs, with increase in propionate and decrease in acetate, and also the impact that potentially has on rumen pH. And you can see generally we see declines in rumen pH obviously as we increase the supplementation levels. And I guess where the holy grail is this optimum rumen pH that we're trying to achieve in all of our rations. And I guess the definition of what the optimum rumen pH is can be open for a little bit of debate, and certainly a suboptimal rumen pH is open for debate, because I think within the literature some people suggest that measuring Sera is anything below 5.8. Other papers suggest 5.6 as the cutoff, and other people would suggest that we need to be looking at the area under the curve or the time spent below a certain pHs as the main sort of drivers. But certainly I think most people would accept that we need to remember what it is we're actually feeding here. We're not feeding monogastric animals, we're not feeding pigs, we're feeding the rumen. We're trying to improve rumen function, we're trying to make sure that we're providing enough forage to create good rumen mats, good rumen fill, and have good cud chewing and good rumination in order to make sure that we're doing things as healthy as possible. And if we do get things wrong, then what we can see here is that there's a couple of photographs here from a study that was done in the UK where animals, they had some Sera, and you can see the damage that was caused to the lining of the rumen there. And basically that causes problems with hyperkeratosis of the lining of the wall, which reduces obviously the ability of that to absorb nutrients. But it also causes problems in terms of we can have pathogens and toxins be transferred into the bloodstream because of this damage. And we know that the gut in itself, in its entirety, is kind of the first line of defense in terms of immunity. And if we're damaging that through the diets that we're feeding and the nutrition and getting things wrong, then there's quite a big potential for negative impact and the negative impact on performance. I guess some other effects, negative effects of Sera, we know that it reduces dry matter intake, we know it reduces milk yield, we know that it can reduce milk fat, and we can have problems with laminitis, with maybe liver abscesses and diarrhea, etc. And I think also it's quite interesting when we're talking about Sera is the susceptibility to Sera seems to be different or seems to vary a bit in terms of groups of animals. So being able to predict that is quite difficult, and obviously I think it comes down to a lot to do with feeding behaviour and social interactions within the group and how often they feed, and stage of lactation and dry matter intake has quite a big impact. But it would seem to appear that certainly if an animal has been exposed to a Sera risk and has had a low rumen pH and there has been some damage caused, then generally it seems to be that they would be more susceptible to having another incidence of Sera. So I think clearly everything that we can do to try and minimise any problems and any risk there is going to have quite a big impact across the whole group. And I think particularly around the transition period, that's a key part in the production process, and we want to make sure that we're doing things as properly as we can to make sure there's no risk in terms of our increase in supplementation around early lactation. And I think in Tom's presentation, Tom Overton is going to talk a little bit more about, I guess, the importance of fibre, particularly in the transition period and that very important period. I just want to also touch on the beef side because, Sera and problems associated with low fibre are not exclusive to the dairy industry. We know that in the beef finishing industry, in terms of beef finishing units, that fibre levels can be pushed down to very low, very minimum levels with very low roughage, very low NDF levels, and the majority of diets would tend to have a lot of co-products, a lot of byproducts in them, and we can have up to 75% concentrates. And we know that that has the potential to cause problems, particularly with Sera and particularly with issues of low fibre. And just for information, this was a study, it was a survey more than a study, and it was done actually on Brazilian feedlots. And basically what they did was they asked the nutritionists that dealt with a lot of the big feedlots there, what were the main reasons why animals were pulled from the feedlot system. And basically the first one was respiratory diseases, which probably isn't surprising. And the second major issue was acidosis. So clearly it just serves to illustrate the point that it's not particularly a dairy problem, it's also an issue within the beef industry. And I think if we could even extract a little bit more value from the fibre that we're feeding, then potentially there's the opportunity that we could feed more of it and have the less need for supplementation. That would have a benefit in terms of animal performance and rumen health. And I think we'll hear a little bit more about that today in terms of the opportunity around trying to improve the quality of forage through the use of some other techniques. So just finally, very quickly in summary, which I think hopefully it will lead in nicely to some of the other presentations. I think the trend seems to be continuing for increased production. It doesn't seem to be slowing off in any great degree. And that creates challenges that I think are going to be ongoing in terms of forage levels being pushed even lower and being squeezed to the absolute minimum. Obviously, it increases the importance on forage quality and being able to extract as much value as we can out of every unit of dry matter from forage that is going into the animals. And obviously if we can improve the utilisation of forage, then the benefits in terms of animal performance and rumen health are going to come to the fore. So I think that's really all the slides that I have. I wanted it to be more of an introduction to the topic, kind of highlighting some of the challenges that exist, and hopefully it gives a bit of a flavour for some of the presentations that are going to follow. So I'll end it there, and if anybody wants to ask a couple of questions, then you're welcome.
Well, I've got a question for you, Drake. Can you comment on the challenges that we've had this year in Ireland and GB in regard for forage quality and weather, and how it's timely to come up with innovative methods, as probably Dr. McIlmoyle will comment on that. How is it timely really to come up with those solutions so we can provide our farmers in inventory?
Yeah, I mean, this summer, particularly in Europe, and I'm not sure about North America if there was the same challenge, but certainly in the UK and Ireland, and particularly across many parts of Europe, we had quite a significant period of dry weather, very warm, hot weather, which basically meant that we had a drought. Forage levels and grass growth was really, really poor over probably a 2-month period. And that created and has created a problem now coming into the winter period, where we have many situations, many farms where they have a forage shortage. And obviously that pulls into sharp focus some of these issues where guys are trying to feed cows with limited forage stocks, limited forage availability. And what are the opportunities around that, and what can we do to try and help those guys get over that problem? And even the availability of straw is, to try and supplement forage base is becoming quite limited in some cases. So, it opens up the opportunity for things like, Vista Pre-T, which we'll probably hear a little bit more about. And, can we actually, even if we have limited supplies of forage, can we gain more value from that? Because we know there's an opportunity there. There's a lot of potential that we're not actually, digesting and breaking down and utilising from our forage in terms of full digestibility. So I think there's an opportunity if we could do things a little bit better. It's going to help in situations where we have limited forage, or forage quality is very poor, for example. So yeah.
Any questions from the audience? Okay, well, help me think. Derek, thank you there.